As John said, it's not important. I am professor at the UCSC, and I was professor in Italy. The important thing is that I was trained in philosophy and political theory. But what I want to try to do today is to understand authoritarianism from a different perspective, so more psychological perspective. For that reason, I am presenting here these notes. But at the same time, I think I should try to combine the two dimensions, so some political theory, philosophy, and psychology. And my general assumption is very easy. I think so. We know authoritarianism is coming back, and I think it will come back again and again and again, because my first assumption is that authoritarianism expresses a kind of open issues of modernity, and is an attempt to deal with these open issues. I will explain, or I will try to say what these open issues are, in my opinion. And every time, obviously, we know that authoritarianism appears in different forms. So I'm not expecting that the new authoritarianism will present itself with the fascist black shirts or the Nazis brown shirts uniform. It will present itself in a different way. But at the same time, I think we should try to understand the two dimensions. So authoritarianism is coming back, but if the term new authoritarianism makes sense, we have to try to understand what is new in new authoritarianism. And my attempt to understand authoritarianism today is, or in my attempt to understand authoritarianism, I try to combine thinkers, people who actually wouldn't like to sit together at the same table. They are very, very different. And my first one, you have the citation, is Ernst Bloch, who wrote in 1932 Non-Synchronism and the Obligation to its Dialectics. Ernst Bloch was a kind of very heterodox Marxist who put together Marxism, Messianism, religion, mysticism, different things. And he wrote this article in order to understand National Socialism. And not just in order to understand it, but I would say in order to make an intervention. So his point was, if this is National Socialism, how is it possible for us to intervene? Question, that we, from Bloch's perspective, was the German Communist Party. So we have to be very clear about it, okay? But the first line of this article, or the beginning of this article, is quite interesting, in my opinion. He writes, not all people exist in the same now. They do so only externally, by virtue of the fact that they may all be seen today. But that doesn't mean they are living at the same time with others. I think this is the most important thing he says in this article. Basically, he tries to understand Germany as a kind of a society in which multiple temporal strata and social strata coexist. So his idea is we have the peasants, we have a youth, we have a workers, we have a white collars. They live in the same now, but they have a different experience of time and they live in different temporalities. Rather, Bloch says, they carry earlier things with them. Things which are intricately involved. times older than the present continue to affect older strata. And this is another passage that I want to underline. Times older than the present continue to affect older strata. So in block analysis was the fact that, so I don't want to analyze block now, but his idea, generally speaking, was, for example, the peasants were more, they related their rhythm and their life to a different temporality. That was the temporality of agriculture, of a different system of production. And they were rooted in land and traditions. Then there were other strata, social strata, which actually tried to speed up the process of modernization and to cut off this other complexity of strata and their relationship with the land, with the traditions, with the roots, and so on. And then he says there is a middle class and youth. They are different, but they also, at the time in Germany, they also express something similar, a kind of a longing for the past. So this is I want to give you just an idea of how Bloch thinks. So for Bloch, longing for the past is not romanticism. Longing for the past is, first of all, dissatisfaction with the present. So for that reason, Bloch says, okay, so we can do something with that. We can do something politically, psychologically, with this kind of a longing for the past. Because when the present is horrible, the only thing we have is the past, is make America great again. And try to, it's not an attempt to go back, it's an attempt to find an escape from the present, especially when the future is as dark as our present. So that was a kind of an image that Bloch gave us of a Germany right before National Socialism. And then he says, this is also, I copied this passage because it shows how open-minded was this guy. He writes, believing, obeying, struggling, are those the fascist virtues? Perhaps. But for many, obeying is the best virtue they have. Order and hierarchy. Do they make up the fascist architectural style? Perhaps. But many are looking for quiet in the order, for a job in the hierarchy. Yes, National Socialist agitation has been called an appeal to the inner scoundrel in man, and rightly so. So I think two things I want to highlight from this from Bloch's understanding of National Socialism. So the first one is, and maybe it's a question, but I think we need a conception of a society today that is able to address this plurality of strata and temporal strata. I think I may be wrong, but I think in the U.S. is about the different temporality of the cost, and so the blue and the red is the different temporality of white, poor, working class, and the rich cost in New York. So you are Americans, you can teach me how to read the complexity of this continent. But I can see this coexistence of many strata in Italy and Europe, and I can see how they have been used for authoritarianism. The second dimension is more psychological, and basically, it opens up the door to psychology. And I think we need to dig into this inner scoundrel in man. And the third way is social, psychological, and the third dimension I want to underline is how is possible to combine an analysis of social strata with the analysis of psychological strata. So the second citation I gave you is from Jung, and actually from Wotten. So as you see, I add very little things. I as a Benjamin said, I don't compare myself to Walter Benjamin, but Benjamin said, I just want to show you. I have nothing to say.
Right.
This is from Wotten, 1936. Jung writes, archetypes are like riverbeds, which dry up when the water deserts them, but which it can find again at any time. An archetype is like an old watercourse, along which the water of life has flowed for centuries, digging a deep channel for itself. The longer it has flowed in this channel, the more likely it is that sooner or later the water will return to its old bed. The life of the individual as a member of society, and particularly as a member of the state, may be regulated like a canal. But the life of nations is great, rushing river, which is utterly beyond human control, in the hands of one who has always been stronger than man. So this is how I can see layers in a Jung discourse. There are archetypes, there is the life of the individual, there is a life of nations, and all these dimensions are located at the different layers of the individual psyche. And some of them are very superficial, very new, like the League of Nations, that is like a child, writes Jung. And for others, it's actually even not a child, it's just an abortion. I don't think it's I don't want to address. It's not about being conservative or not. It's just about how deep are these layers. This is how I understand Jung's words. Thus, the life of nations rolls on unchecked, without guidance, unconscious of where it is going. Is like a rock crashing down the side of a hill until it is stopped by an obstacle stronger than itself. Political events move from one impasse to the next, like a torrent caught in creeks and marshes. All human control comes to an end when the individual is caught in a mass movement. So so my understanding is there are all these different layers. Some of them are deeper and older, and we can imagine this layer as a canal full of water or full of energy, and sometimes it becomes impossible for the individual to control this energy, and this energy is free to go somewhere else, but without any direction and without orientation. The result is psychologically and individually that the individual is extremely disoriented. The individual needs a guide. The individual needs an authoritarian leader who can tell him what to do, what to believe. And a similar phenomenon can happen at a collective level or at the level of a nation. This is my understanding. We can discuss. But what is interesting, and terrible things can happen when this energy is free. But also nice and interesting things can happen. Because the archetype, in this case, Wotan, as archetype, is characterized by an ambiguity. And Jung says, if we apply our peculiar point of view consistently, we are driven to conclude that Wotan must, in time, reveal not only the restless, violent, stormy side of his character, but also his ecstatic and mantic qualities. So, I think again, what is extremely interesting to me is that I want to try to understand today's authoritarianism without judging authoritarianism with the kind of preconstituted normative package in my bag. Oh, it's bad because it's anti-democratic. Oh, it's bad because it's against everything I believe. I want to try to understand authoritarianism as Jung tried to understand Wotan. Maybe there is an ecstatic and mantic quality in what is going on. Yeah.
Just for Wotan, right? There's yet another aspect to his divinity or his persona, right? Because you've got the restless, violent, stormy, and then you've got the ecstatic and mantic. There's also, Wotan is Odin, right?
Yeah.
And Odin, early on, made a journey to the underworld to sacrifice one of his eyes for vision. So he was making a conscious sacrifice to bring up wisdom, sort of far-seeing, which is a third quality yet in the archetype of Wotan.
This is very interesting. Yeah, thank you.
He always wore a patch over his eye, if you remember.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That was the eye he sacrificed into Mimir's endless well of wisdom.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. No. As I say, I'm working outside my comfort zone. Okay. So this is not political theory.
But I think following that mythology helps us become less judgmental about authoritarianism, because I understand what you're trying to do, and I applaud you for it, and I'm here supporting it, and it's very difficult to separate it in that way and to look at it without judgment. So this is good stuff, is what I'm getting at.
I hope so.
It's difficult.
Yeah, I think it's just, my attempt is to change, I want to change perspective, and I want to try to look at authoritarianism in its ambiguity. So if the point is, if there are open issues in modernity, fascism is a way to configure or reconfigure this open issue. Or, let me put it differently, authoritarianism is the wrong answer to a right question. The point is that we don't know the question yet. We have to try to understand the question. And I think, as I said, I think there are some open issues in modernity. And one is, I think what is at stake, especially in historical fascism, national socialism, and even Russian communism, is a kind of a new configuration. And we had this conversation already when Jung presented on Cinemastasia. I think is a new configuration of the relationship between the individual and the collective. I think in this experiment, so let's call authoritarianism a political experiment. In this political experiment, there is also an attempt to find a new path of individuation or a new configuration for the relationship between individual and collective. And it was pretty clear in fascism and National Socialism. And again, I don't want to go through these thinkers who don't want to sit together at the same table, but you can find a similar analysis in Ernst Jünger, fascist, and Gramsci, a communist. They are addressing exactly the same problem about a new man, a new anthropological configuration in the configuration of fascism and National Socialism. And that is interesting, in my opinion. Another way to look at the same phenomenon, what is going on with the ego, with the individual in fascism, or in this case in pre-fascism, is a Freud on mass psychology, or I think the English translation is the psychology of the group. And Freud, in his text, understands groups, masses. So the German term is masses, it's not group. Groups, masses, in terms of lack of, I don't want to analyze Freud, in lack of independence, weakness of, it's not in the handout, weakness of intellectual ability, regression of a mental activity to an earlier stage, such as we find among savages and children, leveling, and again, regression. So I think the term regression is revealing, in my opinion, because the term regression implies that actually there is only one temporality, one part of a civilization characterized by the progress from group, collectivity, group psychology to individual psychology. And there is only this path. So civilization is how the West built the individual. But I think if we abandon this unilinear historical temporality and this faith in Western civilization, I think instead of following Freud and try to define group psychology in terms of a regression, we should say, no, actually it's a new configuration. So the end of the individual is not the end of everything. It's just the end of one possible historical configuration, and maybe is the beginning of something else. A similar approach, Freudian approach, can be found in. I just brought these books to intimidate you. I don't use them. In Adorno on authoritarian personality, and in his text, Adorno follows Freud's analysis of the crowd, and he writes that this analysis anticipates the post-psychological, the individualized atoms which form the fascist collectivities. The post-psychological, the individualized atoms. And then he says, this is in the remarks that he wrote right after the publication of this volume on authoritarian personality. He wrote this volume in California, by the way. And he says, so what? Social factors which are, he describes, he analyzes, social factors which are incomparably stronger than the psyche of any one individual involved. So basically, Adorno's point is what? Adorno's point is, look, what we are facing is the end of the individual because of these social factors. With the end of the individual, we have to consider the end of the individual psyche. The individual doesn't have any capability to resist to fascism, to authoritarianism, to propaganda, to society, because the social forces are so strong that the individual is basically just the individualized. So, and then he said, so what? Actually, even psychoanalysis is over, because there is no psyche to analyze. So this is what he wrote a couple of years after an entire project on the psychology of the authoritarian personality. So there is nothing to analyze, because there is no ego anymore, there is no individual anymore, there is no psyche anymore. But Adorno was stuck in the idea of a Western modern individuality. He hypostatized and he idealized a certain configuration of individuality that basically for him was something in the constellation of Goethe, Bach, Beethoven, Schiller, and maybe three other people, and himself, obviously. Sorry. And I love Adorno, by the way.
Kind of in response to that, and I think coinciding with what you're saying, and bear with me on this, that when I moved from Iowa in the Middle West here to Salinas, basically, in 1985. I'd grown up in the university town in Iowa, Iowa City, and lots of PhDs and lots of thinking and lots of cosmopolitan values. It was set in an agricultural setting, which had certain influences. And I came out to Salinas, and it felt oddly familiar because, I was California and Iowa, very different, but there's a level of sophistication here because of San Francisco, Santa Cruz, whatever, and then there's an agricultural economy. The big difference I found was with respect to authority. In Iowa, there's a respect for authority. If there's a problem, and it doesn't have this oppressive sense there. If there's a problem, the governor, who's elected, appoints a panel of experts that are acknowledged experts, and they come up with solutions to the problem. In California, nobody's going to tell me what to do. I want to vote on everything. There's bumper stickers that say, question authority. There's this sense of any authority is oppressive. And that was very different. And what I found was, what I thought about was that the Iowa cultural roots are basically Germanic and Northern Europe. And California roots, at least in this part, are Oklahoma and Southern, who came after losing the Civil War and were not happy with authority. So that was a big contrast. But it's not just acceptance of authority, it's a different understanding of authority. Authority coming out of Iowa is a sort of way that the community works. Out here you'd use the word the mob or something. In the Middle West you talk about a community.
Yeah.
And that the super individualism that's seen in California was destructive of community, not necessarily fascist oppression.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that there's different ways, and some of it depends on how nice the ruler is.
Yeah.
There's mixed ways too,
Yeah.
but that's, I mean, you talking about authority and authoritarianism, and I mean, the individuality, the culture of individuality, has social pressures on people too.
Yeah.
It does, it's telling you how to be an individual, basically.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
that's that.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yes, I totally agree. Yeah, and that allows me to jump to the other dimension I want to discuss. That is more related to authority. And I start with another citation. It's something nicer towards Adorno. In 1966, he wrote Education After Auschwitz. And I totally agree with what Adorno writes in this essay. He says, often, you have this citation, I think. Often, for instance, in America, the characteristic German trust in authority has been made responsible for National Socialism and even for Auschwitz. I consider this explanation too superficial. Rather, one must accept that the fascism and the terror it caused are connected with the fact that the old established authorities of the Kaiserreich decayed and were toppled, while the people, psychologically, were not yet ready for self-determination. As I said, I agreed. I agree with what Adorno writes, especially the second part. I like the fact that he says that Americans didn't understand the National Socialism, but this is not. No, I'm kidding you. The second part, when Adorno says, yeah, maybe there is something more. So actually, fascism came out a lack of authority, the distraction of old established authorities, and the distraction of old authorities left individuals alone, isolated, and without a compass. And this is a kind of analysis that you can find in other thinkers very close to the Frankfurt School, like Erich Fromm, who wrote an analysis of fascism in 1941. And for Erich Fromm, fascism is an expression of the feeling of individual isolation and powerlessness. Is an expression of the sense of insecurity and anxiety. Individuals, I'm quoting, individuals are looking for supporting factors, which they can find in national pride and family. So basically, what Fromm is saying is that fascism is a kind of this is the title of the book actually, is an escape from freedom. Is an escape from a very specific form of a freedom that Fromm calls the freedom from authority, freedom from many things, basically made the individual just more isolated. And this sense of isolation is unbearable. The sense of responsibility you have when you don't have a compass and orientation is unbearable. And the fascism is a kind of escape from that freedom and that sense of responsibility. This is Erich Fromm analysis.
And so
They cannot go on bearing the burden of freedom from. They must try to escape from freedom altogether, and so on. And a similar, just I give you another two citation, similar statements can be found in another book. This is Wilhelm Reich on mass psychology of fascism. And it's a kind of a crazy book, but interesting. I'm very judgmental today, I don't know why. Usually I'm not like that.
Are you calling the orgone box crazy?
That's the same right.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But you know, the books of this guy were destroyed in this country.
Yeah.
Just they destroyed everything he wrote.
Wow.
In any case, he says the fascist ideology had the best of intentions. He's another Marxist. Okay? So is not sympathetic to fascism, but he says the fascist ideology has the best of intentions, and we have to start from there. And then he says something that basically echoes Erich Fromm. So there is, according to Reich, a kind of a tension between an intense desire for freedom, but at the same time, a structural fear of the responsibility of a self-government. So basically the point he's making is more or less the same. Individuals are not mature enough to assume the burden of self-government, the responsibility for that. And for that reason, they are ready to give up on freedom if they can find something, someone who tells them what to do and what to believe. So he's repeating the same point. So it's about isolation and responsibility goes together in a way that is unbearable for the individual. Yeah.
That came home very powerfully to me. I'll make this short. So in college I studied existentialism, and I read the books and I thought I understood them. And then I was in a workshop that brought us down to, let's just call it empty and nothingness, to the place where, and so empty and nothingness is where you are totally responsible for your own being, in a very existential sort of way. And when I got to that point, I was literally nauseous. At which point I went, that's what Sartre was talking about.
It is.
Yeah, it is really, truly scary to get to that point of saying, I am totally responsible for who I am and what I do in this world, for how I become and how I make myself and my future.
On that point, the freedom from freedom, when you were sharing that, I recently reread Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
And he has a beautiful, I want to call it a chapter, but a few pages on this, where it was, the slave master's design to create this space of freedom for a couple days, get their slaves very drunk on Easter, feed them as much food as they possibly could want, and and then leave them alone and say, you're free for the next couple of days to do whatever you want. And it took less than 48 hours for the slaves to want to be back to work because they had no other. And so, everything you're saying makes perfect sense in a society that doesn't invest in critical thinking with its citizens, and especially if its citizens don't even recognize what freedom is. So I hear it, and I think that what you just said and what Fromm was saying, in what we've learned out of the Holocaust, it's right there. And so what scares me is when these empty cisterns, to use language from T.S. Eliot, are just being smashed all across the globe without thinking about what's going to come next. And I think that that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah. But and yes, sure.
This first sentence you should read, because I think that's a cool sentence.
If humanity cannot live with the dangers and responsibilities inherent in freedom, it will probably turn to authoritarianism. Yeah.
Max, could I say one other thing on Erich or Reich, Wilhelm Reich, right?
Yeah.
So way back in the day, I was publishing a film magazine and working at UC Berkeley Art Museum in the Film Archive, and we had a man from Yugoslavia come through with his body of work, which was just growing then, Dusan Mankovev. And his film that was somewhat large, probably just on the two coasts, right, was called WR, Mysteries of the Organism. And found out it means World Revolution and Wilhelm Reich, right?
Nice.
And the whole film is this exquisite, it's two stories intercut so that one reflects the other. And one story is the advance of the fascists, Germany, World War II, throughout Europe. And as they're advancing and killing and brutalizing, you have it intercut with the story of a man and a woman. And he's the brutalizer, he's the fascist, he's the aggressor, he's the army, he's the killer, he's the raper, and it's a very
Which you found absurd, right? Which you found absurd, right?
Yeah, just totally absurd. So this was a rebirth of feminism at the time too, right? But we are talking about, I don't think we can ever forget gender in all of this. You're doing psychosocial and economic analysis. And I think also it's very important to do religion, because where does this fall back on authoritarianism in the face of chaos or lack of freedom? Where does that come from? When we're looking at Western Europe, right, we have a 2,000-year-old tradition of severely structured, and this is the way you think, and this is the way you feel, and this is the way you're saved, and this is the way, etc.
Definitely. So there is another passage I want to read from Reich, and maybe we can come back to this passage later, because I think it can be read with a Jung, paradoxically or not, but this is what I think. Because Reich, especially in the second preface of Mass Psychology, he describes the psyche in a similar way, with the strata, with the layers. And what is interesting is that these layers are not synchronized, according to Wilhelm Reich. And then he writes that thus the statement that the ideology changes at a slower pace than the economic basis is invested with a definite cogency. he works with the Marxist categories, and now he jumps into psychological categories, and he says the psychic structures lag behind the rapid changes of the social conditions from which they derived, and later come into conflict with the new forms of life. I think this is for me extremely important. So this is when we are talking about these different layers, and or with the image of Jung, there are like canals, channels or canals, canals.
Or
Either no,
or
canals.
channels.
Or channels,
Or
yeah.
Or channels, or
Yeah.
channels. Oh, canals, I like. Oh, okay,
Channels are good.
channels.
Jung was using rivers and riverbeds and canals.
Yeah. Yeah, canals. So the point is that there are deeper canals which represent traditions, which represent older strata. And what now Reich is saying, yes, you can get rid of some ideological superstructure. You can get rid of the authority of family and other things in the last 10 years. The point is this change doesn't take place at the deeper layers, and then you have a conflict. And the point is, what do you do with that conflict? What do you do with that tension? I think this is, in my opinion, a very interesting thing, especially for us, our time, in which so many changes take place at a very high speed. And we think that some changes, which just have begun 15, 20 years ago, are already part of our psyche or unconscious. I think it's not the case. I think there is just a huge conflict between these different layers, and the individual is not ready to harmonize this conflict. This is just hypothesis, something I want to discuss. And so the point is a point that sounds extremely conservative. So is what? Do we need authority? If we need authority, what kind of authority do we need? And for that reason, my last page is what is authority? And maybe now I become a little bit more comfortable in my comfort zone, and I play to be the philosopher. So the word authority derives from authoritas, is Latin. There is no word for authority in Greek. They didn't have the word. It's Latin. And the etymology, the root is augeo. Augeo is not so much the act of increasing. I'm saying that because many people think that augeo means increasing. But according to Emile Benveniste, is not so much increasing, but is the act of creating something new from fertile soil, and the act of mediating the historical level with a level that is unachievable and therefore not at someone's disposal. Authoritas has to do with the transcendence, has to do with something that is unachievable. And I think this is important. So is this relationship with that dimension of a transcendence that can introduce innovation, but innovation within continuity. Whereas we are obsessed with discontinuity, with rupture. Authoritas is the way in which continuity, in which continuity and discontinuity are entangled. Another citation, this is the historian Mommsen. He gives us a description of authoritas in the Roman Senate. And he says, the Roman Senate received its authority from the past. Transcendence, tradition, past. Thus, this assembly of elders was the ultimate holder of the ruling power. There is a dimension of power. And the divine protection of the Roman Commonwealth, religion, and furnished the guarantees for the uninterrupted continuation of that Commonwealth. Continuity. So authoritas is a very strange word. I think almost, once I say to my students, almost impossible to understand for the modern Western mind. It is something that has to do with the religion, with the transcendence, with the past, with the tradition, but at the same time is what can guarantee innovation and discontinuity within continuity. It's almost paradoxical, and it
has a rejuvenation to it, a rejuvenation quality, where it has to be continually churned.
I think it has more the sense of an orientation. So the past doesn't work as a romantic past. Oh, we want to go back. Yeah. The past works as a direction. So this is the way you have to go. This is the way you can establish continuity within the discontinuity and the other way around. And the point is, in order to go where? In order to go somewhere that is not definable. Because the other dimension is that the authoritas mediate between the historical level and another level that is unachievable. So it has to do with the transcendence. Since it has to do with the transcendence, it requires many different perspectives. It's impossible to address something that is unachievable with the power of a majority. It's not democratic. Authority is not democratic. Actually, democracy and authority are opposite concepts. If we mean democracy, what we usually mean for democracy. Okay, I'm not an enemy of democracy, but if we think that democracy is a procedure in which the majority rules and the majority can establish what is the law, this is something that has been made without authority, but just with the power. Because the majority can be totally wrong. The majority can be the majority who want Hitler or whatever. Yeah.
Would an example of what you're talking about in this, using authority for this transcendent or historical thing, what it reminded me of was the process of the development of theology in Christianity, where early on, basically the New Testament was in charge of making this transition from a Jewish context to a Greco-Roman one. And then through the medieval times, there's these times of disruption, but then an authority coalesces to connect what's the new with what this old was, and use words using the apologetics was the word, but expressing it in a new way. Like you can have Alan Dershowitz trying to explain why it's okay to go around and do what used to be illegal, and now it's legal. But just this to draw on, and you have the authority to do that because of a recognized expertise or respect or training or something.
Yeah.
It's just an awkward concept that just came to my mind when you tried to define the authority as with the necessity of the past to find the orientation, and I had in my mind something more mathematical in imagining a data set and the democratic process would be to take a decision or to forecast something, to take the average of the data set, to find what's coming up. An authoritarian system, as you describe it, would be more a little bit like artificial intelligence is working with a data set by identifying pattern in the data set and finding the directions to that are more likely to occur to forecast what's coming from the data set. So I don't know where I can go with that, but
No, I think two things. I agree with you, and it's possible to say that so if power is a future oriented, power has to make a decision in order to go ahead. The temporal dimension of power is the future. The temporal dimension of authorities is the past. Authoritarianism is a lack of authority.
Right.
Is a power.
Right. And so, going back to the title of tonight.
Yeah.
Talking about authority, where do you see genuine authority today?
I think, this is the great question, and I will end exactly with that question. But I think the lack of authority is our problem. But we have to be able and have the courage to readdress the question of authority. And I think this is not an easy thing to do, especially today.
I remember, recently the Democracy Index was released, and the United States keeps falling down, and little things like that are windows into kind of this concept of authority that are proving that. I don't mean to be a bummer, but are proving that people aren't ready to address this. So I think, again, back to the thesis of tonight, this is really interesting. I want to challenge us all to think about how this plays out in that individual substratum as well. What authorities do we subscribe to?
Is it progressive and evolutionary, or is it a pendulum where the authority will come and inevitably overreach and oppress people? There'll be revolution that will then set up the process again.
I want to say something else about your definition of authority here that hasn't been touched on again, which is not so much the act of increasing, but that of creating something new from fertile soil. And I think this gets to something we haven't quite embraced yet in this definition, and the creating something new is a recreation. Right, so, and then there's a recreation constantly going on. If we look at depth psychology, if you're on the path of individuation, both in the psyche and externally, and how does that happen? It comes from the fertile soil. What's the fertile soil? Right, I mean, just to be goofy for a minute, that's what Wilhelm Reich was trying to do. He was trying to get people to go inside the orgone box and really become embodied and attuned to their bottom energy, the energy of life, the energy of eros, if you will, right? Which there's nothing romantic about that, there's nothing necessarily sexual about that. But it's life energy that is the fertile soil. And also the authority. The authority also, we've been talking external, but we again have to take it internally, and it's the ego. And there's a direct one-to-one relationship with the authoritarian political structure externally and the authoritarian political structure internally. And that's where that's where Jung did his psychotic break. Because, as you said, it's just everything disassembled, everything fragmented. There was no ground.
What is your assessment now?
Now means today.
In this moment.
In this moment.
Yes.
Give me 10 minutes.
Okay,
Fair enough.
In that 10 minutes, I want to.
No,
He says we'll get there in 10 minutes.
I can,
Oh, okay.
He's going to get us there in 10 minutes.
exactly. This is what
Oh,
I'm
I
saying.
see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's not digress.
Yeah, no, it's not that I need 10 minutes to think about it. Maybe more, but
Just tell us what to do.
yeah, okay. Yes,
Let me write it down on a piece of paper.
that's the point.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful. Yeah. So yes. So what I'm saying is actually, you know, so this problem with authority, I think, is one of the big open issues of modernity. And modernity began with a kind of distraction. Modernity erased the past tradition. You know, in philosophy is Descartes, and things begins with a kind of a tabula rasa. You know, everything has to be created ex novo, ex nihilo, and the authority of Aristotle is just bullshit. You know, it's nothing. And Hobbes began his political theory exactly in the same way. Modern revolutions understood, represented themselves in a similar way. It's written in the $1 billion. It's the Novus Ordo Seclorum. So it's the beginning of something. It's the new succession of ages. And so everything in Western modernity, at least, is about this rupture with the tradition and the past. But I think this is just one way Western modernity represented itself. There are many other. Again, there are layers. This is only one layer. Maybe it's the most visible, but it's only one. This is what I think. And I think for that reason, I think it's possible to readdress the question of modernity, of authority. Sorry, and this is my not the last citation, and then I have the very last with Jung again. So. In her book Between Past and Present, Past and Future, Hannah Arendt talks about what she defines the Roman trinity of religion, tradition, and authority. So according to Arendt, authority can only be understood in this trinity: religion, tradition, authority. I am asking myself, and now I'm asking you, if it's possible to have a quaternity instead of a trinity, and what the quaternity looks like. What I try to understand, what I try to think, is this. So, for Arendt, we have religion, tradition, authority. I think maybe we can have a transcendence and tradition in the vertical axis. And we can have authoritas, authority, and imperium, that is basically power, or in the horizontal axis. But maybe we can have different terms. I'm open to change it. I'm working on that. I feel that it's possible to work with a quaternity instead of a trinity, and I think that we can gain something more, but it's just an open issue I put on the table. And I think transcendence has to be included in this picture. Because otherwise, as I said, modernity erased authority. Modernity pretends to have erased transcendence, but it lies. modernity just relocates or replaced transcendence somewhere else. And this is what in political theory is called political theology. That is actually not a very nice thing. We can talk about that. So modernity, I'm approaching the answer. Modernity is a kind of a long crisis of authority. What we call modernity is nothing stable. It is a long crisis because is an expression of a crisis of authority. And this crisis of authority takes two different directions, two different trajectories. I think the same crisis is at stake every time we have authoritarianism, but the same crisis and the same attempt to find an answer, a new configuration, is at stake when we have a revolution. My understanding of revolution is a kind of reconfiguration of authority, but that requires a redefinition of the meaning of revolution. That is not the Jacobins' trajectory, but if you want, in the sans-culotte, in the French Revolution, is more the sans-culotte trajectory, in which these radical sans-culottes were working with old institutions, with the medieval institution, with imperative mandate, with association. They were carrying the continuity within the discontinuity. And for the Jacobins, they were just residual, and they were trying to push back the revolution into the old regime. But they were the most radical part of the revolution. So the same thing happened so many times in so many different revolutionary experiments. In Russia, with the SR and the peasants. It happened in England with the diggers. It happened in Germany with the peasants, 1525. So basically there is another trajectory of a revolutionary trajectory that always worked with authority. And with say again?
Gandhi is a good example.
Gandhi is a totally this, exactly. Gandhi was not afraid to address continuity and transcendence. So this is the political dimension, and I want to give the last word to Jung. So back to psychology, and this is Jung on psychotherapy today, written in 1948. It's about a tradition. He says the breakdown of a tradition, necessary as this may be at times, it always a loss and a danger. And it is a danger to the soul, because the life of instinct, the most conservative element in man, always expresses itself in traditional usages. Age-old convictions and customs are deeply rooted in the instincts. So again, this is a kind of analysis of different layers. If they get lost, the conscious mind becomes severed from the instincts and loses its roots. It falls back into the unconscious and reinforce its energy. It is then the rootless condition of consciousness. It is then that the rootless condition of a consciousness becomes a real danger. Thus, I'm skipping a passage. Thus, in dealing with the individual, no matter how revolutionary his consciousness attitude may be, we have to reckon with a patriarchal or hierarchical orientation of the psyche, which causes it instinctively to seek and cling to disorder. It is perhaps a humiliation sign of a spiritual immaturity that the European man needs and wants a large measure of authority. So it's easy to say it sounds very conservative, but I don't think we don't gain anything by saying that. I think it's my problem with the different layers, and with the fact that there are not only psychological but also social layers which are deeper and older, and they are rooted in past and tradition, and we cannot get rid of these old strata without danger, because the cost we have to pay when we get rid of these old strata is disorientation, social and individual disorientation. So that means, and this is the end of my presentation, I think. So I think so there are two questions on the table again. So one can be defined as a need for psychological maturity, and how it's possible to achieve a new level of maturity. And the other one is more political, and the question concerns the possible restoration of that kind of authority, the restoration of authorities, in which restoration is not the bad term that we usually think, because it can also be just another layer of the word revolution, that etymologically means revolutio, that means restoration. And this is how in many events, and early modernity especially, revolution was thought and understood and practiced as a restoration. That was, and that requires authority. That requires, for the diggers in England, the authority of the gospel, the Bible, and that requires an idea to restore something that has been broken. So this is, I think that's it.
So make a comment about the revolution.
Yeah.
So Russian Revolution happened in 1917. So in 2017 there was 100th anniversary of Russian Revolution, which was totally ignored by the Russian government. There was no celebration, no mention, no, it's like nothing ever happened. Not from Putin, not from any government official, nothing on television, absolutely erased by the Russian society. Not erased in memory. I'm sure not erased in memory, because we all brought up with this romantic notion of this Russian Revolution, and then the tables were turned, and now I think they just don't know how to comment on it. They have to reassess it, because they denied it, and they don't know how to commemorate it, how to mark it. They didn't know. It was just nothing. Huh?
Do they fear the whole idea of revolution re-emerging in people's psyches? Like, oh wow, we did it before, we can do it again.
I think at this point the Russian society is just so conformist. It's the idea of conformist. I'm sorry, conformist. I don't think there is any idea of revolution.
Because with the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of
energy. Yes, there was a lot of energy when Gorbachev was there. You know, there was a lot of hope, and people were full of hope, and they were looking into future with confidence and with great expectations. And then just the tables turned again, and now there is low energy. People kind of just accepting what is brought from the West. You know, McDonald's and Pete's Coffee and all billboards.
Not Pete's.
They just
Starbucks.
Starbucks. No, you're right. Totally. Sorry.
Pizza's a California thing.
Right.
I'm buying stock in Pete's, man, if that's happening.
Well, what a mistake I made.
You did not answer my question.
Okay, he still is waiting for the answer.
What has to be done?
Yeah, he needs to write down your directions.
Before we go there, I just real quick, Tatiana, because thinking of 100 years.
Sandra, don't knock me out.
No, you're in. But this is because 1916 was another big revolution, not as big, but they had their 100th anniversary in 2016, which was the Irish threw the English out after more than 1,000-year occupation. And what's interesting about that is the Irish Revolution is ongoing. They are continuing to bring collective, transformative transcendence into the culture, but stay grounded not in their colonial past, but in their pre-colonial past. You know, so now the Gaelic is spoken throughout the land. You know, and they threw the Catholic Church out, even though they were manipulated to keep it in the Easter Rebellion of 1916. So it's interesting. It's a much smaller place, and they're very different. But there is the possibility for
So they're still holding on to that mythology.
ongoing revolution. Yeah.
So they're just
You can't compare
remembering the good parts of that.
your Russian thing, then Lenin took over and just millions of people died, and it was pretty brutal. It wasn't like zippity-doo-dah.
Are you talking about revolution?
Yeah, when the revolution happened, and then Lenin, and then communists, and then people starved. You know, it's just Stalin.
Terrible.
Yeah, so it's not a zippity-doo-dah thing.
No.
Really.
One thing that strikes me talking about this is like authority.
I asked the question and everyone else.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What I was just going to say, and it goes into what your question is, but authority requires respect from a community to actually recognize it. And so, like, if we're searching for, because my question to you was, where do you see genuine authority today? And it strikes me that in order for an authority to actually take hold, there has to be a communal respect piece for it. And then that goes to your question.
That basically is the bottom line of what I'm asking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is what?
What is authority today?
In other words, this whole discussion about authority, and then we're looking at today's, what's going on now, which is pretty outrageous, I must say. And I just want to get your 2 cents on that, that's all.
Yeah.
That's all I'm asking.
Okay, maybe the easiest way to answer that question is I think today two things. So on the one hand, I don't think this is the reason why the anniversary of the Russian Revolution was ignored, but I think that idea of or that model of revolution doesn't work and it cannot work for many reasons, and I think one of them, that is actually a Jacobin idea of revolution, and that was based on authority, but the authority of the future. Was the authority of the future to realize we have an end, and the end justifies what we are doing now, because that end is so good. We are building a free society. That kind of a logic means end relationship, in which the end justifies the means, can be applied to every revolution, American Revolution included. So it's just the way the West understood revolution. But I think now, for many reasons, and we can discuss about that, what is a more political theory, or maybe a psychology, I don't know. But the point is, I think the future as a temporal dimension is exhausted. The future doesn't have authority. The only way we can imagine the future today is a catastrophe.
Right.
It's the end of the planet. So Trump has a point when he says, "Make America great again." If there is no future and the present sucks, look, the only temporal dimension that is available is the past, and is able to smell that, and he goes there, like many authoritarian leaders in Europe.
Right.
That's what
Now the bright
that gets
side.
to that gets to it. That's what that's what I'm asking.
What is the?
Now,
What do you mean by past?
what past? That the past was better than the present. We have to empirical example. So we have to keep. We have to take back our industries from Middle East or wherever they are.
We have to respect the earth, like the Iroquois.
No, that is another way to. Yes.
That's the past.
Yeah,
that's
the
America.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I was answering. Yeah, what Trump means when he says, "Let's make America great again."
Right.
And what our European not mine. What the European leaders say is when they address the past is we have to rebuild our nations in terms of homogeneity. That means we have to get rid of all these migrants because the nation has to be a very homogeneous place. And we have to reestablish religion and values, and all the values and all the cultures. So this is a way to idealize the past that doesn't exist. It's a narrative, it's a construction, it's an invention. And they use it.
Yes.
And people think it's okay.
Yeah, so the majority of authoritarian governments in Europe today say we need to restore the past.
Yeah.
But they deny half of the past.
Yeah, oh sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So, and that's part of the problem.
Yes.
Well, another part of the problem, of the mistake, is that in terms of referential, when the future doesn't exist and the present sucks, as you say, it's not the value, the authority that, or the fertile ground, and maybe correlated with the value, the word value, is more linked with the mythos than the past. And maybe that's one of the mistakes to say, well, we refer to the past as to develop the argument around authority as you developed it. It's more linked with the mythos, the narrative of a place, of a culture, of a nation that carries some energy, and that at one point with modernity may collapse, and there is this search of a new mythos, of a new narrative, so the culture and the communities can be reborn. And maybe that's where we are right now. And the question is maybe not so much to find examples in the past, but to find a new narrative, to build upon the old narrative that needs to be brought forth to
the fertile ground and the body, because we're always, the whole thing with the deficient synesthesia is there's no one present. There's no one in the body. So that's the quartenio, that's the fourth. That's what Jung talked about, is in the earth, in the body. It has to be realized in the physical reality.
That's back to what he was saying about the riverbeds.
Yes.
In a sense, what people are thinking now, I think, is there's all this pain because of all the artificial dams people have built. They want to break down those dams and the water will run where it's supposed to.
Right.
Yeah.
But they also forget that when it used to run that way, there were floods every 6 years that killed a lot of people.
And brought different forms of life, just
And,
like
well,
it
and,
used
and
to
a
be.
lot of death and a lot of disease.
Yeah,
So-
they used to have controlled burns, the indigenous.
But not, yeah,
cultures
no,
here.
you can't see being perfectionistic and making up stories is not the same as tying yourself to mythology.
No,
Conrad,
but we're
no,
talking
but this
about
is-
recreation,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you're visiting other layers
But
in
you're
order
not
to
looking,
harvest.
you're not looking
Okay.
at the negative of that, whatever you're holding up. You're not looking at the negative, and it's crucial to look.
Yes, I agree.
Why do we call the negative the shadow? Because
The-
we're a Jung.
Conrad, I just want to say, like, where this is playing out now, I don't know who else tortured themselves for 4 hours or more today watching the proceedings, but, like, you know, what you were just saying, you sounded exactly like Adam Schiff in the way that he was describing, like, yes, like, let's use these, the strata that was laid before us from Alexander Hamilton, but also, like, let's look at our current situation and what is happening now and what power this body has, and let's be a proper authority. And then the arguments that were coming left and right were all about the past and the future precedent. And there were very few people willing to actually sit and talk about the present moment and are working with the Constitution that everyone says has authority. Right? But at the same time, the past, the future, the present, it was just an entangled mess all day for me. So if you want this in action, just watch tomorrow, because it's going to be the same thing.
But that, for a large part, is the intent.
Yes.
But I have a,
Yes.
but I, this,
All I can say is that what to me is interesting is if you look at cultures that have failed, and there are similarities to the fact that they usually tend to worship one thing or another, and this is all, you know, I love the diamond stuff, and to me, I worry that we are doing the same goddamn thing that has happened all the time, a long time.
Does ending mean to fail? Maybe they just live their life.
It means, well, this is my book, The Act of Being Towards a Theory of Acting. So there we go. That's all.
Well, that's
No, I'm not going to say that. But to me, it really does spark with this whole subject. It's just fascinating, which is kind of why I wanted to get your thought on the fact that the how is this going to influence our next year and a half or whatever?
Our next?
Year and a half. The election, before the election.
And then also
that's an
ultimately
easy
the inauguration,
question.
Yeah.
which could play into
Yeah.
this as well.
You know. Usually when I present my stuff, not it's the first time I presented this kind of things on authoritarianism. But when I present my stuff on state and power and my criticism of the monopoly of power by the state and so on, there is always a couple of people in the audience, and they ask me, so what, Max? So if you get rid of the monopoly of power by the state, so basically they can say things like, so basically you want the militia, or you want the Republicans with the garage full of guns, or you want instability because you want so many people ready to use guns to defend their own interest, and then you want a plurality of powers, and so blah blah blah, and my answer is I have different answers ready made.
For different crowds.
Yeah.
So what are we getting?
So
do we have to pay money for that?
no. Today is for free. So the first answer is if you want is about a maturity. You know, are we mature enough to address the kind of anxiety that comes with the instability and uncertainty? If the answer is no, then just take the monopoly of power by the state. But don't complain if the state is digging in your emails, is listening your phone conversation, because it's doing this thing for your own security. And this is what you want. If you want security, there is a cost you have to pay. Or you have to be ready to address a certain degree of insecurity, but that requires maturity. This is exactly Gandhi.
Yeah.
Gandhi has exactly the same answer.
So in cultures,
conflict is just a dimension of a human togetherness.
Yeah.
So in cultures that glorify the youth, that have lost respect for the authority that comes with living through a life of anxiety and insecurity and making it through, are we basically fucking ourselves by continuing to hold the youth as an ideal and old age as something to be disrespected? Or, you know, would we do well to work to become more mature by actually respecting the people who have become more mature and learning from them and allowing them to lead us to more maturity through our anxiety?
So the baby
But then
boomers
you
don't
can't
have enough
hijack
power.
elections.
I think you have to define
Well,
maturity.
I think
There's a lot of old people that aren't mature.
Yeah.
They're just old.
Distinction. She wasn't referring to old age, it was old age. She
Oh, I
was
thought
referring
so.
to old age as mature.
Excuse me, I could hardly hear what she was saying.
I make a comment about all of this authoritarian. Let's just talking about if the state wants to control, they're going to tell you you need to be more secure. So they take freedom away from you in order to give you security.
Who are they?
The state.
The state. Who do you
The
mean
government,
by
whatever government,
The
who's ever in
government.
control.
that? Okay.
Whether it's a
Individuals with
whether,
power.
no, stop.
Yeah.
Whether it's authoritarianism or whether it's a democracy, if those who are in power want to control, they will take your freedom away from you by telling you you want to be more secure and then and use the available resources like the news likes to tell you how bad things are
Be tough
to
on
help in that manner. So you have to be careful about saying authoritarianism is not necessarily someone. It can be a democracy who wants to stay in power. And that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's like you were watching today on the news in the Senate.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
So when we had Stalin, there was no crime. I mean, you can
Other than the crimes he committed.
Yeah, he was the only criminal.
You were
know.
secure.
Everybody, we
You were
were
absolutely
secure,
secure.
absolutely secure. You can leave your doors unlocked, and nobody would dare to
Unless
take
you
anything.
spoke out against Stalin.
Yeah, and in Chicago, the neighborhoods with low crime were the ones where the mafia lived.
I want to mention something about people around my age because I've been thinking a lot about because I'm 36. I just turned 36. And thank you. And a lot of people my age, when we get together, just talk shit about the older generations. and how, we don't have jobs, we don't have pensions, I have a gig, I'm in a gig economy guy. We don't have, on the news they love pointing out that like we're going to be the first group that are going to have less than our parents and all this stuff. And so like there's this okay boomer haterade being shared, and there is a complete lack of maturity on both ends of that. Like I see it on both sides of it, and I think like the moral authority in society right now is being pushed and projected unfairly upon the youth. And I've said this several times here.
They did that to us too.
And I think that like,
It's the media's. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by are these youth culture warriors that are leading
as the moral authority.
that are leading the charge on handguns. Because nothing's been done by, and then the blanket generalities of nothing's been done by Mitch McConnell's Senate, right? And then climate change. It's like you fucked up everything, and then now it's everyone who's under 18 is going to save the world. And I felt that way too when I was growing up. The moral authority was always in the youth. And
60s.
And,
remember the boomers?
Right, and so I think that like this maturity piece is really essential, and I'm asking myself this question, and I have no answers, and I know you might, but like, where do we turn to for moral authorities in the 21st century now? Like, where are these moral authorities?
Where any?
Rumi. Akbar's not here.
Yeah.
I want to say in answer to that, and just on the question of authority, and I can never say this without people going, "Oh, Sandra." But
Sandra.
Let's just say it first.
We got it out of the way first. Okay.
I do it too.
So I was a philosophical and political and social anarchist back in the day. And when I try to talk about anarchy today, irrespective of generation or gender or race, people go, "Oh, chaos." That's all they can do. And that is not what anarchism is. And the very first part of the philosophy of anarchism is about authority, and it's about self-governance. Mm-hmm. So one has to overthrow one's authoritarian structures in a very negative way, but in the positive way that you were talking about here, in order to educate oneself, in order to become a moral authority oneself.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about individuation.
Straight out of Berkeley.
Yeah, but we didn't. Yeah, thank you.
You're just straight out of Compton. That's straight out of
And so, I'm sorry, John, what did you say?
That sounds really difficult.
No,
He said individuation.
Oh, right, individuation, yes.
I posed that as a question.
Yeah, it is the same kind of thing, is self-authority, self-education, moral responsibility.
But isn't that what's being seen as what's caused the collapse? I mean, that's what people are saying, that this is all selfish, it's anti-communal,
it doesn't have
it's
anything to do
anti-family.
with selfish. It doesn't have anything to do
Sounds
with
selfish.
No, it's self-governing.
Right.
You govern yourself, and from highly educated, what's the word? Individuated.
Do you voluntarily give your taxes?
Individuals, you form self-governing communities, because without the self-governance in the individual, it's never going to be able to go anywhere. So you have, and this was the impetus behind, back to the land.
So selfish and elitist as well. I see.
No, there wasn't anything elitist. I was working in a free clinic. It was a free clinic. I was working in a free university. It was a free university. It wasn't hypocritical. It was put your goddamn thinking and your feeling and your body on the line. And so, Sandra, okay, I'll be quiet. But I want to say that's anarchism is this self-governance. You can't have a real democratic state unless the smaller communities can align themselves and are responsible to their own environment, to their own terroir.
Yeah.
Everything around them, everything you touch and everything you do.
Yeah.
And people have tried that and have done that in smaller groups throughout history. From the
What is their
beginning
own
of time.
terroir? Well, who owns it? So if somebody
Where
else
you
comes
live,
down,
where you live, where you eat, where you sleep, where you have
where are the
relationships with
boundaries
other
to
people.
where?
The
Like,
watershed.
do I only live in Monterey, so I can only claim Monterey? If I want to go down,
Nobody's claiming anything. You're making.
well, you were saying, yeah, they live on their own. I mean, and I think that works really for small groups.
That's what I'm talking about, small groups.
But the world has 8 billion people in it.
Yeah, but those 8 billion people all live in some kind of communities. I'm not saying this. I'm trying to answer the question of the question of authority, and in the definition.
Bring it to the psychology.
And thank you. Is that what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And bring it to this definition, which I really like, of recreation. You know, there's no time bounds. You know, of getting in all the layers, and how do you create? Where does responsibility? Where are you not manipulated? Where do you say no to a profound manipulation of everything that you believe in? Where freedom becomes, you know, paratroopers, right, to protect you from the other.
Well, on the other side, it's sort of like you were talking about, libertarianism is sort of the
Yeah, exactly.
other side, and that's
Yeah.
not a solution either.
No.
Right.
So
But
there's somewhere between these poles.
Back to early 20th century, Élise et Reclus, fathers of the concept of anarchy, the angular stone is education.
Yes.
And maybe the takeaway this evening with these new definitions is that anarchy as an utopia requires maturity.
Yes.
And otherwise it's just an utopia.
Yes.
And this is the question putting that on its head is like, is there the maturity? If there is no maturity, it becomes
just a thought before you have the last word is
I try to give it
maturity. Whatever form of authority that we choose, whether it's democracy or otherwise, there has to be this maturity.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Self-governance.
Yeah.
No, I mean individual self-governance. You have.
No, I'm saying there has to no. I didn't say that.
No, you said maturity.
I said maturity, and that's different.
No. Anyway.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
We're telling you, we're authority.
Sandra, it can be inclusive, but it's different. It's not.
It can be inclusive. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a. I don't know if I may, but it's an interesting dynamic.
Give him the chance.
Yeah, give me a chance.
No, that's peace.
Please.
No, I think maybe it was just for fun, but there was some real tension here. And I think that this is interesting, and I think because I think we should just try to understand first the politics in a very different way. So politics is about we experiment togetherness. We experiment the way it's possible to live together, and it's not about the scale that the state or the net. This is just one experiment that actually failed miserably, and maybe there are some. So politics is an open field of experimentation, and I think the first step in the maturity is to address the fact that this experiment that we call politics transcends our capability to understand what is the goal, and for that reason we need these different perspectives. And we need the maturity to understand that we are experimenting together something. And the scale is not so important, in my opinion. Can be the clinic. The scale can be the churches, in which you have these sanctuary practices, and they help migrants. And I think this is much more interesting than try to address some, I don't know, petition or empty solidarity for the migrants. You know, what these people in this sanctuary things or practices, what they do is they claim the authority of their own church or religion. Actually, it's an old tradition. It's a tradition that goes back to Middle Ages. And in that tradition that goes back to Middle Ages, they said they are welcome. And they use that, they claim that tradition as an authority. But that authority is just different from the authority of the government. It's not against. It's not, I'm disobeying. They don't use the word disobey. They don't. They say, this is another authority, and we obey to a different regime of authority. Yeah. I think this is so crucial, because in a certain way it changes our way of thinking. Instead of thinking in terms of, rights, we want the right to migrate, we want the right to do everything. No, their language is the language of duties and responsibilities. What if we start thinking of what we are and what we do in our everyday life in terms of duties and responsibilities instead of rights? At least we go one step towards maturity, because we have to take responsibility for everything we do and we say. So my issue, and this is my problem, and this is the reason why I presented these pages here, is how we can combine individuation with the social change. How is possible to link these two dimensions, and how these two dimensions can implement each other? And I don't believe that first we change society and then we will have the new man it's gone. It didn't work. I don't believe either in go on the mountain and meditate and you will change the world. I'm sorry, I don't believe it. Is how is possible to combine these two things, and I think Jung's understanding of individuation is an interesting way to go, and because it's about a lot of things that we were discussing. It's about maturity. It's about responsibility. It is about becoming something else, but without breaking with your past. So it's about a lot of the things that this is my understanding that we say. I don't know if this is the last word. Is it just what I want to try? It doesn't sound very bombastic, I know, but maybe
it shouldn't be.
Exactly. But maybe this is how I think things can go, and I think we shouldn't be concerned with the scale of the experiment. Yeah. I think this place can be just a place of experimentation, period. I don't need to build a new party. This place in which people meet once a week can be a place of experimentation.
What you said, I think, is so important at the beginning about parallel authorities. Yeah. It's really, really, really critical, and you're just describing a small one, and also, spiritual authority. I mean, I'm my spiritual authority, and Jung was saying, the sanctuary movement is the spiritual authority, and I can, through my spiritual authorship, I can align with, whoever I please, but God, Jung.
Freudian slip for sure.
Skip around. Well done.
What was I going to say? Jung says, you have in a sense, spiritual authority. You need to create your own God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is on a parallel authority, with, as you said, in the state, no matter what side we're talking about, that may, hold certain protective, responsibilities for you or whatever, right? So and there's just as there's many times, there's many parallel authorities, and we have to be aware. We don't give them all away to one super authority. I think that's so important, Max.
Yeah.
I had a mentor who opened one time with a question to all of us. What does the world need right now that you are most qualified to provide?
Amen.
I just to note, because an enjoyable note to as we conclude, that the word maturity, the root of that is ripeness. Matura, the Latin matura means ripe.
Yeah.
And it just sort of connects me, Greg, with your work with wine, which then connects me with Jeff's work with wine, which is how the grapes from the earth grow and bring everything with them and come to maturity, and then they have to die and go into the crypt, and then they're brought back as wine. And I think that's
and the wine has to mature too.
And the wine matures.
And then we invoke the archetype of Dionysus.
Yeah. But that requires time and patience, and the problem is we don't have time and patience. I think our time is this is the problem, and the result that we don't have a time to become mature. We have 25, 30 years old guys and women who are still immature. So it's a
billionaires.
And billionaires. Yeah, exactly. So is another. I think this is back to Gandhi. So what is in an entire Indus Swaraj is about being patient. It's about wait. But this is just doing that is almost subversive in our time. Is
radical. It's radical.
It's radical.
It is.
It's radical. It's radical. When everything has to speed up and everything has to be very fast. And it's not just slow down. It's a kind of internal
very much
temporality. I don't know. It's a and it's not the last word, but.
Well, you'll have to come back.
Yeah. We're looking for your next word.